Hey, how you doing? Hey, this is Abby from Plex Guide. So I'm just making a quick video here for you regards to Portainer. Just try to give you a little bit of a background on what it is and how it works. I remember when I first discovered, try to use Linux and really understand it. Portainer, Docker, it just blew my mind. I couldn't really get my head around it. I understood it to a degree because, like right now, you see how I have a virtual machine up? This is VMware. So right now, you're basically running Ubuntu on top of Windows. Once you understand VMware and a bit of virtual machines, even if you don't use virtual machines, it's just a pretend machine. You assign some processors to it. So you can say, hey, I want you to have, 8 gigs of RAM and 6 gigs, 6 processors out of 8. And the thing is, VMs can be great, but they can be a pain. For VMware, things can get very expensive. You got to pay for, obviously, the software. They have Esxi, which is like their server software or home server software that you can use, but it's only limited to 8 processors. So the thing is that I always tried to find a Windows solution. So I always tried to look up like dedicated Windows servers, but I never really found any good dedicated Windows servers. They either cost a lot or they were just kind of out of reach. And then you got to remember, you got to pay for these licenses. Sometimes they're usually like 24 to 50 bucks. And then a lot of these Windows servers, they have all kinds of rules on them. So if you don't really know much about Windows Server, when you load it up, you can't even barely use the Internet Explorer, which is now Edge. And they maybe improved it in 2016. But anyways, regarding all this stuff right here, one, if you don't do it, you don't have to worry much about it. But the point is this is a route that you would eventually trail down. You're like, I want a remote server. I don't understand Linux. Let me go to Windows route. Well, our goal is to kind of save you some of that pain. So the thing is, when I first heard about Docker and Portainer, when I heard about Docker, they were talking about virtualized containers. And I'm like, huh? I don't get it. Because no matter what ways anybody explained it, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And part of the reason is because of my experience with VMware. So you're used to running, again, a fixed amount of stuff, and you assign it to a VM. Now, VMware does have the ability to kind of cross-load and share and kind of work the processors back and forth, but it just doesn't work out that well. The thing is, Esxi has a handicap, so free Esxi handicap. Basically, you're only limited to 8 processors. So you'll see people ask these different questions. So basically, you can use a lot of RAM. I think it's unlimited now. But what happens if you go to, let's say we go to wholesale internet, and this is the problem that I ran into. So let's say you want to get Esxi. So we're like, oh man, look at these powerful servers here. So you're like, okay, check this out. I want this one right here. So this is 12 cores, 12 threads, and guess what? Those threads count. So right now you're talking about 24 threads. Well, you can only use 8 out of the 24 for your virtual machine. So you can set up 3 virtual machines, but then you're limited on space, and it just causes a whole bunch of problems. So basically, with our solution, you basically utilize Linux, and obviously you're going to do everything through a terminal. You're going to install Portainer and Docker, and so Docker is 100% free, including Portainer. So here's Portainer right here, and what Portainer does, it provides you a user interface in order to manage Docker. So Docker is kind of like, the best way to say it, it's kind of like the VMware that you're using on top of your Linux. It's basically the management program that holds all these imaginary containers. So let's go to just Docker directly. So hopefully I can get in. Maybe I configured it, maybe I didn't. Okay, so right now, these are containers that I have right here. Now, the great thing about all these containers is they can all utilize all the processing power of your machine. So if I got wholesale internet and I got 24 threads going, these different programs run as though they're programs on Linux, but they're like in a bubble, like in their own container. So in the way we can see it is kind of like what you saw earlier. Was here I just typed Docker PS, and it shows, hey, here's net data, here's Plex, here's Watchtower, here's Portainer. The problem you run into with Linux is that you run into a thing called dependency hell, and I really didn't get this. So if you type different things like install Plex Linux, you'll start seeing all kinds of different guides, and kind of this is part of the reason why we did Plex Guide. So HTPC guides, they're pretty reliable for a good start. So I was like, okay, I got to do this, I got to get the keys, I got to create these paths. It was a lot of work. When you didn't understand these services, it got kind of intimidating, and you wonder why stuff didn't load up. And to be honest with you, this is a really short guide, and it probably works. But you see, they talk about permission issues. So instead of doing that, you can just use Plex Guide. So we're gonna go ahead and launch it. So let's see what we don't have. Let's create a sonar container that we don't have. So instead of doing all of that dependency stuff and everything, this just takes care of everything for you. So I updated Plex Guide to kind of show you what's going on in the background. So don't freak out if you see the lines of code. So we're going to go to managers and sonar. So basically, we're going to pick a container type. Here's a line of codes called YML. It's basically just instructions. These instructions then download the actual container and then deploy it the way that you want it. So yeah, it's like installing it, but it's like, again, in its own bubble. If you decide to wipe the container, you don't damage your system. So if you can think of bubbles sitting on top of your system, you're pretty much good to go. I know it's kind of a weird way to explain it, but it's an easy one. So if I go throughout my operating system, I won't see Sonar actually installed. I may see files depending on how I have it. So the way we wrote up our container for Sonar is, again, remember I was talking about those YMLs. So Sonar. I'm a little bit blind today. There we go. So a little bit of background. So when you learn how to write up these YMLs, you're going to run into issues too. There's different versions of YMLs, and then there's Docker Compose, and then you got to write it up. There's just all kinds of headaches that go with it. So we basically use, I always like to call this Ansible, but it isn't Ansible. But anyways, it's a series of rules. You see, it says, hey, bring in these variables, bring in this image variable. So it's going to create the folder. See, look, it's already creating the permissions for you and everything. It's all standardized. Here's the container that you're going to deploy. And the great thing about Docker is that it allows you to manipulate the ports the way you want it to. So if you want, basically we're all familiar with port 8989, but if you want the support come out of port 7979, it will. The actual Docker container itself will actually think it's running on port 8989. So Docker acts kind of like as a translator. So right now, if I do localhost 8989, I should be able to see it. See, there we go. So you're wondering, well, what does this have to do with Portainer? Well, again, this is the reason why Portainer is useful. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to be like, all right, I want to do all this wonderful stuff with Docker. So you're going to be like Docker, and then you're like, well, what do I type? And then there's all this stuff, and you just really don't know what to do. So by having Portainer installed, localhost, and it's always going to be port 9000 for Plex Guide, you basically can manage it. So you see how we deployed Sonar? You probably didn't pay attention in the beginning, but in the very beginning it said 4, and Sonar wasn't there. And there it is. So remember I said it runs in a bubble? Well, check this out. This is what I first got excited about when I first saw it. So I was like, stop, right? So if the actual program is like really running on your Linux system, you will go crazy trying to look for it and trying to kill it, all the init and all that other stuff that you got to do. So you see how the container stopped? Because again, like I said, it's in its own bubble. So you see right here, look, gone, pretty much stopped. And you're like, well, it's gone. You can start it back up again. See? And then it comes back online. There you go. So this is what Portainer helps you do. It helps you manage this. So Docker is basically your manager, and Portainer is basically your user interface for all this stuff here. Now, Portainer and Docker are two different organizations, so don't mix those up, but they pretty much go hand in hand. There's other solutions out there. So when I first came here, before I deployed all those containers, you can actually deploy containers here too. So if you don't know what you're doing, you're like, oh, cool, look at this. I can install WordPress, and you'll be a little bit lost with maybe some of the options, like, wait, is administrators are restricted? But for Plex Guide, you're not really going to do all this. Most of what you're going to do is you're just going to be on the containers itself. Here is the actual log. So like if I want to look at a Plex log, it shows you what is executed. It's good to detect errors. I was using Portainer for a whole month and didn't understand that. And again, there really wasn't a great guide on it. You can also use inspect some variables that you see here. I really don't use this, but it comes handy at times. You can also click the stats and it will show you how well Plex is operating. So here's all the processes that it's running, and then here's the CPU usage. So right now, again, this is just a virtual machine, but it's giving you a factoring time. So you can see that. Let me see. 16. Yeah, so you can see it kind of going up and down. So and there's the refresh rate right here. So if you're trying to see how much memory and all that stuff your container is actually utilizing, you can actually do so. Let's see what else we got here for you. So I haven't dug down too deep, and the reason for it is because I never really had to. But I've seen others, say, hey, this is what I do and this is what I can do. Portainer, well, technically Docker has the ability to create networks. And you're like, well, why would I create a network on top of itself and a bridge and all this other stuff? Trust me, it has its reasons. Basically, it's for security, and then also you want to segregate all your stuff. So right now, all the containers you're going to deploy are going to launch on the Plex God network. So I can click this here, and then you see right here, each of these containers have their own addresses. You can actually type just sonar plane in some areas, and it will literally translate for you. So right now, this runs pretty much kind of like DHCP style. Just go down the line here. So volumes, really don't mess with that too much. Events, this kind of does help you. So I've used this to troubleshoot before. Other than that, you're really not going to really mess with this too much. So unless you're just really trying to get crazy with it. Containers. So let's say you want to edit or manipulate your statistics here. So you saw click the container. You scroll down. Now look right here. It shows you your permissions. I'm running 1000, 1000. There's the group. Here's the path, and there's basically different variables. This took me a while to understand because I was deploying in variables within Ansible itself. See, so that's where the 1000 comes into play. So there are certain variables that were there all along, and I never really knew. You can see right now we're using Traffic. That's a whole nother thing itself. Don't worry about that. This is basically responsible for the whole reverse proxy thing. And then here's the volumes. So basically, this shows you what paths are available. So you have inside the container and outside the container. So Docker, again, can be a little confusing, but it's good. So right now, you can see that the real machine right now is mount union fs. So on the left side is our actual real machine. So if I type cd mount union fs, you see how it's there? On the right side, this is the actual path inside the container, so it translates. So if I'm inside the container itself, like union fs right here, and I type that, it brings you to this on the real machine. So right now what we're doing is we're exposing the volumes. So here's the thing. You're like, well, I'm running a Plex container, so what happens if I delete the container? Well, if you failed to do this, any of this, expose your data, basically all your data goes along with the container. So basically you can have parts of your data exposed to the outside if you want. So if I type union fs, like how that's showing, it's not going to bring up anything, but there's some containers that will let you go inside of it. So let's see if I can go in here. I believe in Plex you can. Console. And it's helpful to log in as 1000. The reason is because if you log in as root, it'll give you misleading information. Well, I wouldn't say misleading, but if you're trying to troubleshoot, if you're root, you really won't see everything. So you're actually in a command line inside the container itself. See, that says branch Plex Ubuntu. So if I type cd union fs, you see what it did? It actually works. So let's say on this side right here, let's say we type cat, let's see, touch Plex guide. Oh yeah, this is a real mount. Stupid me. Basically, I set this up for another demo. 1 second. Terminal. Okay. Yeah, mounts are a whole nother story, and this is why I love Windows. Okay, anyways, let's look at some. So if I go to cd mount union fs, and then I do make directory test. Should work. LSLA. Oh, well, it's because it's the real actual. So if I type LSLA here, which may or may not work, there you go. So you can see different things. So you saw like how I did LSLA here. See that ZZ all the way at the bottom? So if I do it here, LSLA, we always call it Lisa. You see how it's there down at the bottom? ZZZ. So basically, let's see here. Where is it? So basically, this is basically a translation. So this is basically saying from, let's see, this one is, yeah. So this one's saying from outside the machine, inside the machine. So it's going to take, again, it's just going to take you playing with this to get used to it. And you got to have reasons why for doing this. So for example, if there's like a configuration file that's in Sonar, you probably want to see it on the real machine. So let's say if I go to cd op app data Sonar, see right there, LSLA, and you see how there's the actual configurations. We exposed it. So here's the cool thing. If you decide to destroy this machine, well, not machine, but if you decide to get rid of the container, see docker stop Sonar, give that a second. And again, I do apologize with, some of the information here might be a little bit overwhelming or fast, but I'm just trying to give you a realistic perspective. Sudo docker remove Sonar. So if I do docker ps, docker should be gone. But you see, I started memorizing some of those commands over time. So if I go to Portainer here, you could have just went, see how it dropped one? You could have just went and clicked it, and then you could have did remove and just call it a day. But you're like, oh my God, I lost all my Sonar information. Well, guess what? You didn't, because it was exposed. So if we look at, let's look at the Sonar YML. Let's look here. So you'll notice that the path here was opt app data Sonar. Where right now? Okay. I'm losing my mind here. There we go. Okay. Op app data. Okay. So, apologize. I thought I was looking at the Plex one. Okay. So you see op app data. Now, the reason you see this role name here is because it's an Ansible thing. So the role name here is actually Sonar. So just pretend Sonar is right there. You see how it has /config. So if I actually, let's bring Sonar back up. So this is not the way you would normally do it, but for Plex Guy purposes, you can. It may or may not work because I might have some variables. Yep. Okay. Looks like that's working. So you see how it's deploying it. So here is Sonar, pretty much good to go, port 8989. And if we go inside the container, I think Sonar maybe doesn't let you, but let's check. We can just go in as root now. I don't care for right now. But I can't recall if you can. Okay, you can. Okay, good. Normally I don't come in as root because Sonar usually has all kinds of permission issues. It runs ABC user. If you ever, for some of you who kind of know me early on, you probably remember this. If we do make a mistake, you may see this. So you remember how it was /config? So cd /config, LSLA, and you notice what's there. See, LSLA. So there is that translation piece going. So if you didn't expose that data, then basically you wouldn't be able to so basically if we destroyed the actual container, then we would lose all of this right here. Well, technically this wouldn't even exist on the real machine itself. So if you had all these configuration files, all these logs, and you failed to expose it, then poof, there goes all your data. So I hope this video helped you just a little bit, and I know it's quite a bit of information, but this is just a basic understanding. You know, take a container, play with it, go in here, and see what's going on. So, like, you know, if I go in here and I go with, you know, user 1000, LSLA. So there's certain things that you really can't do, but config is good to go. LSLA, the reason is because we expose all the permissions. See right there, it says ABC, so that's user 1000. So even though it says home over here, so it's the same thing. It's that whole 1000 piece. Because when we first built Plex Guide, we first had this thing running all root, which was bad for security, and a lot of people wasn't really too fond of that. Last step here, some of you may sometimes forget your password to Portainer, but you know, in the guide itself, it's really easy to fix. If you blow away a Portainer, you're not going to lose anything. So what we do is we do sudo remove. I know I'm root right now, but just to make it easy, app data. Make sure you pay attention to what you're doing. You don't want to delete that actual folder. Did that once before. And then sudo docker stop Portainer, and then sudo docker restart, or you can do start Portainer. You probably just did restart anyways, but it's just something I do out of habit. So one of the things that most people will get stomped on is this right here. Let's see if it worked. You see, you're like, I can't get in. You know, people are like this, right? You're all pissed off. Can't understand why Portainer does this, but guess what? Refresh the page and it should, knock on wood, there you go. See? So now you can remake your password and you really didn't lose anything. So that, make sure you always pick local right here and you're pretty much good to go. You see, there's all our containers right there. So that they weren't affected by Portainer. You can be an idiot right here and do this, which I did once in the very beginning. I was just removing containers. See how right here? Now you're like, okay, what's going on? See? Same thing. So you gotta pretty much redeploy it to get it back up and going. So hey, I appreciate your time. I know this has been a little bit of a video, but hopefully this helps you feel a little bit more confident, understanding a little bit of Docker, a little bit of Portainer. I mean, you'll see some more videos. Appreciate your time.